Our live oak is experiencing some serious problems. Chances are some of you out there are dealing with the same thing. So let's talk to an expert. Our in-studio expert guest today is Mr. Steve Hauser. Steve is the owner and president of Arborilogical Services Incorporated, based in Wylie. As an International Society of Arboriculture certified arborist, Mr. Hauser has been providing tree care for over 40 years. But he doesn't limit his activities to just trees. He's also a certified master gardener and a certified master naturalist and quite the tree climber. So with that, let's welcome our guest, Mr. Steve Hauser. Hello, Mr. Hauser, or Steve. Welcome to the Shades of Green Show.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Excellent. Well, the reason I wanted to speak to you is because we've had several customers come in the recent weeks asking about bark popping off their trees. And we've got the exact same thing happening here at Shades of Green on one of our older live oaks that's on the property. I've got some video that I've shot. Let me play that for you with some photos that we've taken, and then we'll discuss it on the other side. Let me bring that up here and go to this. So these are live oaks. They're leafing out. This is the same tree shot from the north and a photo from the south. Nice canopy, all leafed out. This tree completely defoliated after the February freeze. But then we notice this. As you can see, we have bark popping off the tree. It's I can tap on it and it sounds hollow in some places, but then there's other spots where I can feel that it's still in contact. As bad as this look, it's worse on the other side. Let's walk around. As you can see, we have a swath that's about 4 to 5 feet tall and probably 1.5 feet to almost 2 feet across. And there's some more hollow spots here, and some pretty big cracking up here. So it's almost completely around the whole circumference of the tree. Not looking great. But as you can see from these photos, the tree is still fully leafed out and looks okay from a distance. It's only when you get up close that you see this. And come in closer, Blaze. And don't worry about me, just look at this. This is just totally exposed. It's hardening up under the bark. I can feel it's connected, but then we just have this wide expanse and some hollow spots. There's a photo of it, and that bark we didn't peel off, it fell off. We just piled it up on the side. So that's what we're dealing with. We've had a few other customers come in and just seeing what I'm assuming is some kind of a damage related to the extreme cold that we had back in February. But you're the expert, so you tell me.
Well, there's a lot to talk about. To begin with, what happened to these trees? That's on everybody's mind, especially earlier in the year. To begin with, trees carry elements, water and elements up and down the vascular system. And I don't know if you can see this very well or not. It's kind of a replica or an example that I created just to show people the straws, which are the xylem and the phloem portions that are right underneath the bark. This is like the bark. This is like the vascular system of your tree that's carrying water and elements upwards and downwards. So what happened to these trees is they started to pull water up to get ready to grow for the season, and then we had the extreme cold weather. Well, what that does in essence is inside these straws, it forms ice crystals. And the ice crystals are no different than the piping on your house. Most people know to wrap the pipes on their house so that they don't freeze. It's no different with the vascular system of a tree. It starts pulling up water through the vessels. It freezes, and then it expands and contracts and damages these vessels that are so critical to carrying water up and down. Now, some of the trees had only brought it up partway up the trunk, so the trunk had damage to it. Other trees, especially some of our ash, for instance, carried water and elements all the way out to the ends. So they might have some trunk damage, but they also have quite a bit of dieback out on the tops and the ends of the limbs. Mm-hmm. So that's basically what created it. Our biggest problem as arborists is I can't go back and recreate these vessels. There's nothing I can really do to put vessels back on the tree. I mean, I wish I could transplant bark and cambium and xylem, and it has been done before, but like the live oak that you showed us, that's a large section of cambium growth that's is lost. So we can't just transplant it on every tree. So we're pretty limited what we can do. We can try fertilizing, but even if you fertilize the tree, if most of your vascular system is not existing, it's not able to carry it up. So
right, to go back to your pump, your pipe analogy, it doesn't matter how much water is in the well or how much fertilizer you apply to the roots. If the pipes have busted, it's not going to get to your faucet.
That's true, but you've got to also realize when we fertilize a tree, that can also stimulate some growth down where it's damaged, which might help it to heal a little bit faster. The thing that we learned in 79 and 80, we had cold damage, and in 83 and 84, same kind of deal, live oaks with trunk damage on the base, the bark's peeling off. And most of these cases back then, we told them the tree, you know, if it's 100% loss of all that vascular system all the way around, it probably wouldn't survive. Well, lo and behold, within a few years, some of these trees were able to reestablish that cambium and xylem layer and even the bark layer as well. So we learned that if the tree has enough energy, it can heal the wound sometimes. So what do we do with the trunk? Well, we basically leave it alone, let the bark fall off, don't peel it off, just let it fall off on its own and hope for the best. You can try fertilizing it, might or might not help. But the upper growth of the tree is still green and healthy right now. Our problem is it's using all of its reserve energy to produce that foliage and to try to heal the wounds. So it's a question of, is the tree healthy enough to heal the wounds and continue growing and produce its own food? Or is it just going to run out of energy and turn brown on us? And there's no real way we can know that. We don't have a meter we can put on the tree that says, here's how much energy is there. So when you fertilize a tree, and a lot of people get this wrong, they think they're putting down fertilizer when they fertilize a tree, but all they're really putting down is elements that's carried through this vascular system up to the foliage, and then through photosynthesis with the sun is when it produces its actual food. It's sugars and carbohydrates that come back down the vascular system, and it's stored in different parts of the tree. So that's it in essence. You know, the folks with trunk damage, we can't do a lot for them. The ones with damage up in the upper crown, it's late enough in the year to where those dead areas are not going to try to relieve. So it becomes a question of, do we cut the dead out, leave the green, or do we just remove the tree and start over? Right. So that's on a lot of people's minds right now, and the biggest question. So, you know, as a general rule, you can use kind of a 50% rule. If over 50% of the top growth is all gone and dead, it may not be worth saving, especially if it's, you know, 60, 70, 80% of the whole tree is gone. It's probably not worth saving. We cut back those dead ends and we just have a trunk coming up with big limbs and little sprouts coming off of it that are green is not ideal. Those sprouts are poorly attached to the bigger limbs. As they start to get bigger and bigger, they can just break off. So, you know, if it's extensive damage, probably not worth saving. You know, less than 50% damage, yeah, you've got a pretty good chance of the tree surviving. And then you've got live oaks like yours where there was no dieback in the top, but a lot of trunk damage. So that's another one where, you know, we hate to prune it or even fertilize it. If we can, sometimes we will. If people want us to do everything we can to help it regenerate, we can do that. But it's just basically wait and see, unfortunately.
Right. And so you think even with the extent of the damage on the tree here on the property that I just showed you, again, the canopy looks great. It's fully leafed out after, and 50 years, I've never seen a live oak drop all of its leaves, but I saw a lot of them this year. So you think that it's not worth we're not at the point to write off that tree yet?
Oh no, it's still green and healthy as it can be With that much foliage, it's still producing the food that it needs to compartmentalize and grow around that wound.
Okay.
When we make cuts on trees or they're damaged, let's say a car hits it, a lawnmower hits it or whatever, it damages the bark, but it also damages that vascular system underneath. Now, typically, a tree will try to grow around the cut wound or damage like that with cambium. It's cambium layers that start to grow over it and then slowly compartmentalize that wound. And your tree was starting to show a little bit of that callus tissue, is what we call it, on the side, trying to start walling it off. But what they tend to do, and what they did many years ago, is the ray cells come from the center of the wood outwards to the outer edges, started to regenerate the bark and the cambium xylem layers. So it is trying to compartmentalize, but it may also stimulate some other growth in that center there that will reestablish that cambium layer. So we'll have to wait and see. That's the best we can hope for. It kind of depends on the amount of damage. If it's 100% damage all around the base, probably won't make it, but I probably wouldn't cut it down, especially if the whole top is green.
Right.
So if it's 50% damage, yeah, it's probably got a pretty good chance to maybe heal as long as it's a pretty healthy tree.
Okay. Now, you were talking about the canopy damage, and you sent me a photo of that. Let me share that with our viewers. It is right. I don't remember the species of the tree, but I'm sure you know. This is an example of, there it is. This extensive, the whole top of this canopy, it looks like over 50% of it's just gone. And you were talking about this just a second ago. I wanted to show our viewers an example of what we talk about when you've lost half your canopy. This is what we mean, correct?
Right. And in some cases, it's 70 or 80%. Sometimes it's 50. Sometimes it's 20 or 30. But another thing I'm starting to see is some of these areas that leafed back out, they defoliated, as you were talking about, in the early spring. But as they're starting to leaf back out, I've started to see on live oaks especially, they leafed back out, and then the leaves that came out started to turn brown. So, if we've got 50% of the green there, you might have a chance. This tree would really be questionable because it's going to be a stump with a bunch of lush growth on it. It's really all it's going to be. Some of the major limbs are still there, but it will be quite a long time before it ever regenerated. And those little sprouts that are coming up off those trunks are weakly attached. That's what always bothers us. If it's original part of the growth of the tree, then it's pretty strong, but the sprouts coming off the big trunk, just not very strong.
Mm-hmm. And you also sent me some photos of some oak trees that you've got. Here's one of them. Can you tell me about these two trees?
Right. This is at the corner near our shop here in Wylie. And the tree on the right is one that's very similar to your tree. It has some pretty extensive trunk damage. It did lose some of its foliage, but not all of it. And then it leafed back out. It looks fairly healthy as far as foliage goes, but we're still in question whether it's going to be able to survive. The one on the left, no damage to it at all. And that's one of the points to make here. Not all live oaks, not all of any of these species were damaged. There's a few of them that were severely damaged. And for live oaks, we're seeing about 10 or 15% of the live oaks being damaged. But the one on the left was not damaged at all. And if you look on the ends, you can see the new growth is starting to leaf out, whereas the one on the right with the damage has not leafed out any new growth at all. It's just trying to exist.
Okay.
So, some of the species like Arizona ash were hit very hard. There's quite a few of them, like in Garland, in some of these areas that you just drive down the street and almost all of them are either dead or very little green on them. So Chinese tallow is another one where most of them were lost. Red oaks, one of our favorite trees is the Schumann red oaks and even the Texas red oaks. Those were all affected, not all of them, but a small percentage of them. So why were some damaged and some not? Well, the ones that started to pull up elements in water earlier were the ones that were most likely to be affected.
Right. And then you sent us this photo as well, which is basically a mild version of what we're having on our trees. The bark hasn't fallen off, but they do have some cracking.
Right. That's the tree on the right that I was just talking about. I haven't peeled the bark off. The bark kind of helps to keep the tissues underneath it a little cooler and moisture. So, you know, if you have this kind of damage, I generally wouldn't pull the bark off. Like yours, it will fall off on its own, especially if it is extensive. The thing homeowners can do, and we saw some of this damage on red oaks, trunks damage on red oaks. We had a lot of dieback out on the ends. But if you think you have that, you can take a small penknife is what I use and knock on the bark around the lower sections. And if it sounds solid, you'll be able to tell the difference between that and where the bark is loose. That gives you an idea of how badly it's damaged without having to pull the bark off.
Right. And I'm guessing what a homeowner should not do is go out and buy some of that trunk wrap and try to put a big bandage on the trunk of their tree to hold the bark on. That's probably a big no-no, correct?
Well, it wouldn't be ideal. I don't think it would do any damage. The concern with trunk wraps that we're always worried about, on the trees that we just looked at, the trunk is in the shade, which is not too big of a deal. You can put trunk wrapping on it for a little while, but it gets that bark used to pure shade. So when you pull the trunk wrapping off, especially in the heat of the summer when the sun is very intense, it can actually cause some sun damage. You being in the nursery business, you may know Schumered red oaks, especially maples when you plant them, have that really smooth bark.
Mm-hmm.
They're a lot of times grown in the shade in the nurseries.
Right.
So we put them out in the full sun, the south or southwest side, sometimes the west sides, get sun injury on the trunk. So
right.
You know, trunk wrapping probably isn't going to do you a lot of good, so I would probably avoid it.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many parking lots throughout the Metroplex I've been in the summer. And the trees that are getting the reflective light off the windshields of the cars, you can just look and say, okay, sun scald, sun scald, sun scald, sun scald, because it's 100 degrees. The sun's hitting the windshield and bouncing right back up into that plant. And usually one side of the tree looks very different from the other side of the tree.
Well, that's the reason that trunk wrap was used and oftentimes used on those newly planted, especially maples, anything with really smooth bark, to wrap the trunk to protect it for the first year. But my word of caution is don't leave it on too long. And when you take it off in September, October, rather than in July or August, because if you used to pure shade now, you pull it off and now it's full sun.
Right.
You may have wrapped it, but you defeated the purpose and probably ended up with sun damage. So.
Right. It's like someone with fair skin walking out on the beach. It's not going to end well.
Right. I have fair skin. I know all about that.
Well, Steve, I know a lot of people who like to armchair quarterback their plants before they go to the doctor. They'll go to WebMD to find out what they have. So a lot of people have walked into the nursery here and say, I've got frost crack, or some version of that. They've gone to the internet. Well, what causes bark to pop off a tree? And, they're assuming that the cold weather caused the tree to get cold and burst the pipes and pop the bark off. And we tell them, I said, look, bark peel is one symptom that could apply to lots of different things. And I always tell people, yeah, we can solve a lot of your problems here at the nursery. We're generalists. We're like the general practitioner, to use the doctor analogy. But if you got cancer, you want a specialist. So it's like, okay, if someone comes in and they show us photos and they describe their problem, and it's like, oh, that's above our pay grade, or we think that it's X, Y, or Z, but you really need to go and consult a specialist. And Arborilogical Services, you guys are somebody like us. You've been in business for 40 years. You've been at this a long time. You've got a great staff of experts. We recommend people to you folks all the time. But it is one of those situations that, a nursery professional, we know a lot about a lot of things. But if you want someone to really help you, okay, this tree, what's going on with it? That's when you need to call an arborist, because you guys, your whole existence is trees, tree health, the whole process with trees. And people always ask, well, is that necessary? And it's like, yeah, if you want to save your tree, it is. And that's a big investment. Trees are a big investment. You've either spent 20, 30, 40 years of your life with that tree, or you spent several $1,000s to get it to where it is now. Either way, it's like it's worth spending the time to bring in a professional such as yourself or any of the folks at your company to help diagnose the problem. because we always tell people, look, cutting down the tree is the last thing you want to do if you can help it. I mean, if you like the tree and you want to save it. Now, if you absolutely hate that tree for whatever reason, okay, but at least go to the effort of contacting an arborist, a certified arborist, and getting their expert opinion about what's going on, what can be done, and maybe the homeowner, which happens a lot, is probably doing something that is not helping the situation at all.
Well, sometimes the problem with the tree is its owner.
Yes.
It's hard for us as arborists to tell people that. We do have certified arborists. The term certified arborist just means I've passed a basic test. But other arborists, all of them but one, have a degree in plant pathology, which is important, horticulture or forestry, which shows that they have a good background in what we do. But we also look at literally thousands of trees every year in this vicinity and in the DFW area. So we have a pretty good pulse of what's going on out there with the individual trees. The arborist group meets every couple of weeks, and we always have the who's he, what's it. Sometimes it's something that we're seeing that we've never seen before. But having that base of knowledge as a group is extremely important to us as well to our clients. But, you know, there's very little we haven't seen and very little we haven't dealt with over the years. And it's always a comfort to me, even if I come across that oddball, the years of experience in our arborist group is a huge resource that really helps us out. We also work closely with a lot of the universities like A&M, of course, and Stephen F. Austin on their forestry schools and things like that. So you had mentioned the value of these trees. Trees can often be, you know, thousands of dollars in value. And the hardest thing for us as arborists to watch is somebody who does something that is not right for their tree or does more damage to it than good. And that's always unfortunate. So our primary objective is to help educate the public as best as we can. On our website, there's literally over 100 articles, I think, on the website that helps to educate the public about the proper way to do things. So we hate to see the wrong thing done to the trees, and we try to educate people as best as we can to do what's best for the trees. I'd also note, this is kind of unusual, our company is one of the few, if not one of the only ones I know of, where arborists are not on commission. They're not out to sell you things. They're out to educate you and let you make the decision based on a good, solid education. And that's about the best that we can offer to our clients, and helps to increase the value of those trees. You know, trees in front of a house and trees in landscape, including your industry. When you buy a house, a landscape can be up to 20% of the value.
Right.
You know, you have a really nice landscape, you can sell your house pretty quick, especially if you've got these nice big trees.
Right.
The funny thing is, you show people a picture of a street that was just developed with little bitty saplings along the street.
Yes.
And then another one like Oak Cliff or something where you've got these large old trees arching over the street, and you say, where would you rather live?
Right.
Most people are going to say, I want the trees arching over the street, you know.
Exactly.
So there's many benefits of trees that folks are not aware of either. And if you want to see me really get on my soapbox, I'll get on that subject. But
yeah. Again, they help cool your house. They can lower your electric bill. I mean, there's lots of benefits. But to recap, since the subject of having you on today, and I'd love to have you back to discuss other topics in the future, but the biggest takeaway, if people see cracking or peeling bark on their tree, they should not freak out. Take a wait and see approach. A bigger concern would be to see the canopy disappearing. And of course, if they have any questions, they should consult an arborist. But the fact that the tree has lost maybe even a big chunk of bark off one side or maybe even two sides like ours still doesn't mean that the tree is a total loss, correct?
Right. Still has a chance. You just got to be patient. And some people, and I love these folks, but they're very closely attached to their trees. There's emotional attachment with the tree. Grandpa planted that tree, for instance, or,
right.
You know, it was planted in honor of somebody, or, you know, it shades or it blocks a view. It shades my house. It shades everything. So there's an emotional attachment. And, you know, when we had the tornadoes a couple of years ago, it could be a good example. I went to areas where there were trees I'd been taking care of for 40 years, laying in a pile or laying on a client's house. And it was devastating. I would go up to meet with a client, and believe it or not, we were both somewhat in tears because, you know, that's my whole life's work, laying in a pile. And for them, that's why they lived there, because of all these trees. And a lot of them said, I'm going to rebuild, but I'm out of here. I got to go where there's trees again. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's the trees are one of those things that if you've got them and they're old and they're mature and they're doing everything they want you to do, you sure miss them when they're gone, because planting a new tree, there's just no comparison. I mean, it's like a snack compared to a nice 7-course meal. They're scrawny little things. And we tell people, look, you can be patient or you can be rich and go out and buy an instant tree at someplace like Fannin Tree Farm, which has a wonderful line of products. We send people there all the time. They send people to us that don't want to pay for a fully grown tree. But yeah, I totally understand that it is an investment of time. It's an investment of money. And like you said, there is an emotional component to there, especially if they were there when they were young and planted the tree and watched it grow up. Well, in our few minutes remaining here, I did want to touch base. You mentioned the articles. You teamed up with Neil Sperry a few months back to address some of the cold damage. We'll be putting links to some of those articles below this video if you're watching us on YouTube. I'll also include your website. It's arborological.com, correct?
Right. It's arbor and then an I and then logical.com.
Right. And I'll put that link up if people want to check that out, check your articles and your other information. Before we leave, in our last couple of minutes, what is one, maybe two things that you either wish tree owners would stop doing or do more of? I've got one that I will just start off with, which I don't know who started this, the volcanoing of the mulch at the base of a tree, where it's like, instead of just laying the mulch out flat, starting from a couple of inches away from the trunk, they've started making these mulch volcanoes where it comes up. I've seen it as high as 2 feet in some photos that people have brought me from their neighborhoods. They said, this is happening all over our HOA. And it's like, it should stop immediately. So that's on my list. There's no reason for any of our viewers to put a volcano of mulch around the trunk of your tree. Absolutely none. Would you agree with that? Do you have any other suggestions that you wish people would stop doing?
Oh, that's a good one. And we want to pull the mulch back from the base of the tree. We want to see that flare where it flares outwards at the base. Put the mulch further out. Don't make it 6 inches of mulch. That's too much for a tree's root system. You can actually suffocate it. An inch or an inch and a half or maybe 2, not much more than that is ideal, but not on the base, and smoothly going out is ideal. My real pet peeve is all time is folks that strip out all the interior foliage. And even to this day, our arborist will meet with a new client especially, and they'll say, well, I want all the foliage stripped out to help the grass grow. Well, that's a real pet peeve for our, first of all, the industry standard says we don't remove more than 25% of the foliage in any given year. So you start to do more than that, you start to affect the health of the tree. And, a good example would be these people that have had trunk damage like you, or damage up in the top of their live oaks. If they'd already stripped out all the foliage, it doesn't have enough foliage to produce the food, the sugars, and the carbohydrates that are so important to its health. And it's also called lion tailing sometimes, where they strip out the inside and leave all the weight out on the ends. Greatly increases the odds that it will break in a high wind, because all the weight's out there on the end. It doesn't have any balance in the structure. A well-pruned tree looks natural and neat and clean, but it's not stripped out. So the typical homeowner, we try to educate them about that. If they still want 50 to 80% of the foliage removed, we're typically going to turn them down, because we care about being professionals, living within our industry standards and things like that. And I think the people that do that end up regretting it years down the road, because the tree's going to grow right back. As soon as they strip it out, it's going to grow right back, almost all that foliage, and they've accomplished nothing other than damaging their tree. So that was one of the bad things. And I can go into others, but that's the primary one. What's the best thing that they can do for their trees is properly maintain them so that they live a longer, healthier life and provide more benefits to the property owner. And that starts with a good arborist or an educated client. I do have some clients that know a lot about trees and they've learned a lot. They're smaller trees that you've planted. They'll sometimes prune them a little bit. Master gardeners, master naturalists, people like that that have an education can start pruning those trees. If they prune trees from the time you planted them and they're small throughout its life, you can end up with a spectacular tree. But you hire one guy that doesn't know what he's doing, sometimes he can do a lot of damage that I can't come back and repair. So.
Right. Excellent points. Yes. And good information for everybody out there. Steve, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back sometime and discuss other things. I can think of a whole slew of topics, but I'll save that for an email and we'll discuss that at some other time. I really appreciate it because we have had a lot of folks, like I said, and mainly in the last 6 to 8 weeks coming in, asking about cracking, asking about bark peel, asking about stuff. And when we tell them it's could have been caused very likely from the cold in February, they look incredulous and it's like, no, really, sometimes damage can take a while to show up. Some folks have brought us photos that it's so obvious that the whole tree is in distress. It's like, okay, that one needs to come out. And a lot of them, we say, we just wait and see. So as the old saying go, who's the expert? It's the guy from out of town. And so we're in Frisco, you're in Wylie, that counts. You're certainly more qualified to talk about trees than a lot of us here at the nursery. And I really appreciate you giving us your time today.
Well, Tim, I appreciate your time to help educate the public. It says a lot about you and Shades of Green that you're trying to do the best that you can to keep the public informed. You might actually save yourself some time because your clients won't come in quite as much if they've seen the video. But it's still great to have professionals like you that are out to educate the public. You know, our best client, just like your best client, is going to be one that's educated in what's going on.
Yeah.
So my compliments to you guys. Thanks for the opportunity. In the tree business, in the business of arboriculture, there's more topics than we can cover for some time. So you guys are also the eyes and the ears out there. So if you're seeing and hearing a lot of something, let us know, and that's what we can cover next time.
Absolutely. We'll do it.